Then welcome everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this book launch on the third installment of the Homo Mimeticus mini-series subtitled Mimesis, Plasticity and Metamorphosis with Catherine Malabou, and we are very honored to have Catherine Malabou here with us. So thank you so much, Catherine, for making time for this. I know it's a particularly busy time for you since you'll be coming to Leiden next week to receive an honorary doctorate. And so we really appreciate you making time for the launch. You're saying that you're in Paris right now, right?
Right. Preparing my talk for Leiden, by the way.
I expect it. So we are eagerly waiting for it. You still have time. You still have a week. So then, on behalf also of my colleague and friend Willow Verkerk, who co-edited the Homo Mimeticus 3 volume and all the contributors, let me welcome you again to this book launch. The idea for the launch is to try to make it as interactive as possible. So Willow and I will briefly contextualize the Homo Mimeticus Volume 3 book within the context of mimetic studies and the gender mimesis project. Then I asked Catherine, since we want to hear as much as possible from you as well, if you could say a few words about the connection between mimesis and plasticity, any perspective that you want to bring to bear on the launch to get it started. And then I thought it would be helpful since both mimesis and plasticity are concepts that have to do with aesthetics. We say a few words about the book cover image. And after that, I'm going to invite all contributors to the volume to say very briefly what their contributions to the mimetic turn or the plastic turn in the volume was, and to end with a question for Catherine specifically, so that it turns into a more dialogic encounter. And then if there is time at the end, we'll open it up for questions from the audience, both online and in the classroom. There are some students who are actually following from Leiden University who have been following a reading group on your work, Catherine. And so it might be also an occasion for them to ask any questions. Before doing so, Miriam Truant from Leuven University Press, a wonderful editor who has been behind the scenes making the Homo Mimeticus miniseries possible, kindly agreed to say a few words to launch the book launch. So Miriam, I give you the screen.
Hi everyone. And good morning or good afternoon to you all. So, wherever you may be joining us from. So, it's a real pleasure to welcome you to this online book launch and to say a few opening words on behalf of Leuven University Press. So, over the past few years, we've had the real pleasure of building a very rewarding publishing relationship with Nidesh Lotto, and we are very grateful that he chose Leuven University Press as the home for what has now become the Homo Mimeticus trilogy. And the journey began, of course, with Homo Mimeticus in November 2022. So continued with Homo Mimeticus 2, so the second volume co-edited with Marina Garcia Granero, published in October 2024, and now has reached its third installment with Homo Mimeticus 3 on plasticity, mimesis, and metamorphosis. So co-edited with Willow Verkerk this time. So I'm published in November. So what makes this volume especially exciting is precisely that collaboration with Catherine Malabou. So that her influential work on plasticity is brought into conversation with theories of mimesis, and her direct involvement lends the volume a particular richness. So I will now happily hand back the floor over to the editors, and Nidesh and Willow will say more about the book itself, of course, as was already mentioned. And before doing so, I would also like to thank them once again for a smooth and enjoyable collaboration, and one that we very much hope can continue in the future. So, Nidesh and Willow, so I lend the microphone back to you.
Thank you very much, Miriam. I mean, the appreciation is very mutual, and we're very grateful to you and the entire team at Leuven University Press for making this happen. Also, in open access, what is distinctive about Leuven University Press is that they have an excellent open access infrastructure. And so the three installment of the Homo Mimeticus trilogy are available just by going on the website of Leuven University Press and downloading the PDF. Now, I was saying this project, Homo Mimeticus 3, is inscribed in a broader project that aims to open up an interdisciplinary field, which we call mimetic studies, whose goal is to introduce a mimetic turn or a return of attention to a different notion of mimesis. So maybe I'll say just a few words about the mimetic turn and mimetic studies before handing it over to Willow, and remind for those of you who are new to mimetic studies that the dominant definition of mimesis in Greek, mimesis said in English, is still the one to contain it within the sphere of representation, the idea that art imitates, copy nature, and that realism is the genre that defines mimesis. Erich Auerbach's books, Mimesis and the Representation of Reality in Western Literature, is still an influential textbook, but we want to emphasize the fact that mimesis has embodied affective, material qualities that are rooted in what we started calling Homo Mimeticus. And we are obviously not the first in doing so. There are a number of precursors, figures like René Girard or Philippe Lacoue-Labarthe or Günter Gebauer and Christoph Wolff are among the many precursors, so that Lucie Rigaret's notion of mimicry as well, that allowed us to emphasize mimesis on the side of subjectivity. And so that a plurality of different masks of mimesis under the rubric of mimicry or impersonation, identification, if you want to use a psychoanalytical language, or performativity. And now with AI, everybody's talking about mimesis with simulation. All of a sudden, this kind of marginal old-fashioned concept is very, very much discussed in relationship to AI. And what we want to remind scholars across disciplines is that the etymology of mimesis comes from mimos, which originally means actor or performance. And so it is helpful to think about mimetic subjectivity from a plurality of perspectives, from psychology to ethics to politics. Obviously, philosophy and literature are the base for our project, but also the neurosciences and artificial intelligence, even more so. Now, opening up a new field cannot be done in isolation. And as Miriam mentioned, this was part of a broader project, an ERC project I led at KU Leuven, hence the connection with Leuven University Press as well, in which the first thing I did was to join forces with my team, but also with international colleagues working in different disciplines, from philosophy to political theory to feminism, to post-humanism, and so a number of publications emerged in the process, special issues, but also monograph. I take the occasion to thank my editor Bill Johnson and Michigan State University Press as well for contributing to making mimetic studies accessible. And we were still missing a specifically gendered perspective, and especially from the angle of feminist philosophy that is interested in bringing imitation back in touch with the embodied aspect of mimesis, and also in relationship to the neurosciences. And so that's actually the origin of the third installment, the Homo Mimeticus 3, as Willow Verkerk and I were engaged in setting up a project on gendered mimesis, and Giulia Rignano is still working on the project at the moment, writing a PhD on gendered mimesis, that we invited Catherine to join forces and to think about this mimesis plasticity connection that we had addressed in a previous iteration of the Homo Mimeticus trilogy, but still needed to be developed. And just very schematically to mention three things that three ideas or three dimensions that plasticity and mimesis have in common is the fact that they both originate in aesthetics as concepts. Both plasticity and mimesis have a starting point in aesthetics, but we are interested in bringing it to bear on subjectivity. And so that's one of the features that we have in common. So to the fact that they're troubling, destabilizing concepts that tend to have more than one face, more than one mask. There tends to be a passive dimension in both plasticity and mimesis that lends us receptive to receiving forms. And this is one of the aspects of both imitation and plasticity as Catherine Malabou defines it. But then there is also a creative aspect that has to do with giving form. And this second aspect is less usually discussed in relationship to mimesis, at least. And then the third obvious connection is the relationship between philosophy, the humanities more general, and the neurosciences. With respect to mimesis, the discovery of mirror neurons opened up new interest in the study of imitation at the level of the brain, and the neuroplasticity of the brain is a contemporary neurological manifestation of this double aspect of plasticity in the sense of receiving form and giving form. And this is a connecting thread throughout the plurality of masks that Catherine Malabou has been adopting in order to think about both the positive and the destructive side of plasticity. So it's just a very brief contextualization of Homo Mimeticus tree within the mimetic turn and mimetic studies. And as I mentioned, it's part of a project on feminist philosophy specifically. And so I hand it over to Willow, who will say a few more words about the ways in which this book connects to the gender mimesis project.
Thank you, Nadesh and Miriam. Good to see everyone here today. That was a very informative, I think, and thorough introduction. So Nadesh and I met, I think, in Leuven, maybe at least 2020 or maybe even earlier. So, and we shared an interest in Nietzsche. And at that time, I was very concerned with thinking about the relationship between gender formation and subjectivity. So we came up with a project, the Gendered Mimesis Project. And the Gendered Mimesis Project was interested in bringing together three contemporary continental women philosophers, Catherine Malabou, Judith Butler, and Adriana Cavarero. And our idea was that all of them had at the foundations in their concepts of plasticity, performativity, and inclination, a mimetic idea, or mimesis was very generative for these concepts. So we thought by bringing these three thinkers together that we could develop, well, I thought I could develop a new kind of gender ontology. And not only that, we were very interested in looking at literary theory, especially modernism, but even all the way back to ancient ideas in figures like Antigone, to think about dissonant exemplars in literary history and how they, through their kind of dissonance, could help us to rethink how gender functioned at an ontological level. And it was our supposition that notions of plasticity could be very informative here. So that project has had its own directionality, but out of it came this wonderful edition. And I have to say it has been a really interesting experience for me editing the volume, because I had the opportunity to learn about new ontologies of mimesis and plasticity and how they come together in ways I never expected. And so the great thing about editing a volume is that you learn from it, right? And you learn from the collaborators that you're working together with. So I want to say thank you to all of those who contributed to the volume. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Willow, and I can only echo you indeed in thanking all the contributors who very soon will be given a chance to briefly summarize their main insight that emerged from their own engagement with plasticity and mimesis. But before doing so, maybe I give immediately the word to Catherine, who I think at this point requires no introductions. I remember during the original conferences, I had an AI generated introduction to Catherine's work, and I felt really bad because I thought at the time ChatGPT, I think it was GPT-2, wasn't as sophisticated as yet. Now I think the competition would be rather tough, so I won't attempt to give you an introduction. I don't think it's needed at this point, but you're simply one of the most influential philosophers writing today who has urged us to take plasticity in its multiple manifestations as a source of inspiration to rethink what it means to be humans in the digital age, but also from a variety of other perspectives, including gender. So, Catherine, the floor is yours for whatever point you want to make.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this book launch. So I will just list a few, well, say a few remarks, very, very general about the book, and then I'll be ready to answer questions, more precise, specific questions, if there are any. So this book is obviously an extraordinary gathering of fascinating trajectories, and of course, all my gratitude goes to Nidesh, Willow, and Miriam for having made it possible. So clearly, I think when Nidesh and I met for the first time, it was clear that we shared the idea that mimesis could not be synonymous with imitation, repetition, or passive reproduction. It was obvious. And everything that surrounds us today in art, technology, politics, and feminism also, of course, forms of subjectivation, forces us to rethink mimesis as a metamorphic process and not a copy. Which means that if mimesis is plastic, it invents its own form. So the question is no longer what we imitate or who imitates whom, but rather what mimesis does, what it produces, displaces, transforms, and hence the importance of the plasticity. One of the distinctive features of Homo Mimeticus 3 is its architecture. The volume is organized into several thematic sections or rubrics that map different regimes of mimetic transformations and plasticity. So the domains are biological and neurological mimesis, and I'm particularly interested in this one because I myself in the book worked on the subliminal and this region of the brain called the subliminal nodes. Aesthetic and artistic practices, of course, political and social forms of imitation, technological, post-human configurations of mimicry. And I'm really eager to read the gender the gender development. So these rubrics clearly create crossings, resonances, frictions, and not compartments. So I think that, yes, what holds these sections together, and we can discuss that later, is the concept of plasticity. So I think it's helpful to remind that plasticity does not mean simple flexibility nor unlimited freedom, but the capacity to receive form, to give form, and sometimes to destroy it. And all three meanings are absolutely contemporaneous and synchronous. From this perspective, of course, mimesis clearly ceases to be a mirror. If it becomes a plastic operation, it means that it transforms what it engages with, it transforms the subject who imitates, it reshapes the very field in which it occurs. Across the volume, mimesis appears as a site of modification every time, never of reproduction. It appears as a process that produces difference from, as Deleuze says, from within repetition itself. The next thing I want to say is that a central axis to the book is my ongoing dialogue with Nidesh, whose work, of course, he's a great specialist of mimesis, and I'm not. But Nidesh's work is, of course, fundamental in rethinking mimesis beyond the classical meaning that I evoked in the beginning. I think he has become the kind of leading thinker in the field. So you're right to remind us that well, you're not the only one, but what you're doing today is very singular, original, and I think that only you are doing it. So I was very pleased and honored to be part of this conversation, even if, as I said to Nidesh in the beginning, I had never really engaged with my mimesis before, and for me that was a very provoking opportunity. So thank you for that. Um, and in this dialogue, we developed a shared effort to understand my mimesis as affective, contagious, embodied, historically situated. Uh, where mimetic contagion is often described in terms of circulation or resonance, like in René Girard, who you mentioned a moment ago, plasticity introduces, on the contrary, the possibility of rupture, reconfiguration, and even destructive change. This is something that, in my view, is lacking in, let's say, traditional conceptions of mimesis, even once again in Girard, this capacity to break, this capacity to destroy. So the tension between mimetic continuity and plastic discontinuity is, I believe, one of the productive forces of the book. So in conclusion, why does this book matter now? I think because we are living in a moment in which we are left with a profound absence of models. And this is one of the urgent questions opened by AI in particular. Uh, Contemporary art, digital technologies, AI, as I just said, political effects, collective behaviors are, as Heidegger said, I'm rereading Heidegger at the moment because of technology. And I went back to what he says about the abandonment of being. Uh, I think we are abandoned by models. So the book uh, is really urgent because of that. What can we do in the absence of any paradigm, of any model? Um, and how can we avoid the risk? Because it's a very dangerous moment when technological determinism can take the place of models. So how can we resist that? How can we also resist the opposite illusion of pure unconditioned creativity? Like there are no models, so we can do whatever we want. So how can we find our place between technological rigidity and creative flexibility? So it seems to me that the book tries to resist both. So I think in conclusion that the book doesn't offer any synthesis, any dogma, but proposes a field of tensions, as I said, a constellation of critical gestures, and an invitation to rethink what it means to become other through mimesis, once again in this abandonment, this time of abandonment of any paradigm or model. So um, so yes, it is certainly not a conclusion. It's certainly not a conclusion. I know it's a part of an ongoing series, and I'm very curious to see where it will go. Mm. So these were my very brief introductory remarks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Catherine, and very rich remarks. They are indeed for us. It's obviously immensely gratifying to hear from somebody of your stature that the work that we've been doing in mimesis, gender mimesis, is productive and timely and also relevant for contemporary challenges. And I think you summarized it and made the point very, very clearly. I should also say on our end, it has been a collective project, hence the studies, the plurality of encounters that have emerged by working on this concept and the surprises as well. For instance, the surprise surprises encounter between mimesis and plasticity is not something that we had originally planned, that it was part of a determined trajectory, and it was incredibly productive for us. So thank you very much, Catherine. Very much appreciated. Now, as I promised, I wanted to say a few things about the book cover, since it is true that we want to move beyond mimesis restricted to aesthetics, but aesthetics understood in its original etymological sense as dealing with the senses, with human senses, is something that has remained central to mimetic studies. And an image is never simply a representation. And so I just wanted to say a few words about an epigraph that actually is used as a starting point for the book, just moving ahead, which is a phrase by the Roman poet Persius, Aulus Persius Flaccus, that Montaigne picks up in Les Essais, and it works better in French. So let's see if I can still read French. It says, c'est là la colonne d'oie, quand tu mis des molles et l'argile, se hâter et sans fin le pétrir sur la rue agile. And in English, it's less eloquent. The clay is soft and malleable. Quick, hurry to fashion it on that potter's wheel, which is forever spinning. And so the dynamic dimension of the image of hands fashioning the materiality of clay while a form is emerging in the process of encounter between the human and the subject matter was a source of inspiration, I think, that runs as an undercurrent throughout the essays. And I'm gifted with a family that is very artistically oriented, and I already owe the connection between plasticity and mimesis to my daughter, who, when she was 3 years old, I had said off the cuff that it's a phrase that I should never have said, but I said, I don't like Plato. And I was referring to the metaphysical aspects of Plato, of course. And she looked at me, she was 3 years old, and she said, you do like Play-Doh, because she had seen me working with Play-Doh. And so I'd asked her to do, now she's 12 years old, to capture in an image that encounter between the hands and the clay through the kind of technique of use. And that is part of the book, so it's part of the prologue. And I won't say much about the prologue, but I want to say a few words about the image that is on the book cover that tries to capture Montaigne's epigram of a wheel spinning quickly. And as I said, I'm blessed to be living in a family of artists. And so I asked my spouse, who is actually sitting here with me, Michaela Lotu, to try to capture that moment of hands giving shape to clay, not simply as a static representation, but to capture the movement, the materiality, and the sensation of hands giving form to clay.
Hello. So when Nidish asked me to do some drawings about that project, it was natural for me to work as a creator and relate to the object in a energetic way. And so I made a whole series of it, and then I let naturally in the end Nidish choose which one he wants for his book cover. But what is the leading phrase is that the greater forms and is also shaped by the creating.
And you can remind us how you created them specifically.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let me come back to that. So I draw that with closed eyes so that my eyes are not censoring and trying to create a beautiful image, but to really capturing the energy that comes out of the drawing hand.
And in the end, it is indeed this image that we selected, and I was particularly fascinated by the fact that a subject working on an object became a figure giving shape to herself. You conceive the figure as a female figure and kind of emerging from the materiality of the clay in this process of spinning. So I'm very grateful that you gave us this image that is now on the book cover. So thank you very much, Michaela.
Thank you.
And I knew that you'd find the right image for the book.
Did you really make it with your eyes closed?
Yes.
Wow. Wow. It's impressive.
Some lines, some fine liner lines I added later
Mm-hmm.
with eyes open.
Yes.
But the whole
The
shape,
shape. Yeah,
I,
that's
I
very interesting.
I did eyes closed.
Impressive, really.
With aquarelle
Mm-hmm.
and acrylic, there is a huge advantage, I mean, for me at least, to do it with the eyes closed because then the energy flows. And if I would look, then I would make maybe adjustments or something like that.
Very
With
interesting because it reminds me of what Derrida, you know Derrida, Jacques Derrida, the French philosopher. He has a book on drawing where he says that I think he's talking about Delacroix, the French artist who used to draw with his eyes closed. And Derrida says that blindness is the very soul of drawing. So, yeah, that makes me think of what you were saying.
All right, but then thanks very much, Michaela, once again for providing an image.
Thank you, all of you, for listening to me and
Of course,
looking
it's
at my
great.
images.
All right, but then at this stage, I would say we open it up to the contributors who joined us today. Not everybody could make it, and that's why we are also recording it. But I see a number of contributors.
First is Tom Boland. Is Tom here today?
Yeah, sure. I'm here.
Okay, great.
Thanks very much to everybody involved in the project. And I think that this is a really interesting collaboration and the connection between mimesis and plasticity. I found it really thought-provoking. What I'm interested in, I suppose, is the history of ideas. My sort of method, I suppose, is genealogical as a mode of reflecting upon the contemporary. So what I did as part of this volume, I suppose, is this essay on principally taking in Pico, Lenin, and Maslow, who seem like three very unusual characters to throw into one essay because they don't sit as bedfellows ordinarily. What I'm interested in is the different ways in which people think about change and transformation, and I think the overall picture of the book, or the overall, I suppose, frame of the book, in which we were thinking about change, which on the one hand connects to models, that is a mimesis in the way that an actor is imitating, but always, there's no perfect mimesis except perhaps now with AI or something like that, but even that probably not either, you know. So everything involves innovation and creativity to some extent, and some combination of change and reproduction, and how we think about this. So I'm primarily interested in this idea of how in history we think about transformation. There's sort of like, I suppose, quite dominant strands, let's say influential strands. The ideas of Christianity, religious, theological ideas still are very important. I think you'll also see still the importance of certain forms of scientific ideas and Marxist ideas. I won't do a whole genealogy now, but I suppose yeah, I mean that's what I'm interested in, and even now I've moved on to other I suppose more recent works. I'm looking at the moment at ideas about self-transformation and criticism and how those go together. So from my understanding, from the the instructions from the original email, we should discuss our paper and also pose a question. My question is, how do you think about criticism in the sense of maybe criticizing power or criticizing ideology as transformative, both of society but also of the critic who asks the question in this way? Do you think that, and in what way, that critically asking questions to challenge ideology, to challenge bias, to challenge oppression, do you think even if this is, claimed by many people, maybe we disagree about the truth of the claim of the critic, perhaps. I don't know. Can it be transformative, or is there a sort of plasticity that begins to change what a person is when they become a critic or when they articulate criticism to the public?
Yes, maybe this is not what you're expecting, but I was just before the book launch, rereading a passage from The Critique of Pure Reason by Kant, where he says that some people learn philosophy from instruction and stay like students all their life. And he says they are like plaster cast of human beings. And he opposes this approach to philosophy to the critical one precisely. The one, he says, that tries to capture philosophy as at its source. And he opposes plaster to plasticity at this point. So yes, if you, I thought of Kant because of critique. Yes, if you understand critique as a way to get rid of everything that is pre-given, if you understand critique as a way to fluidify the plaster, yes, then I think you become someone else. Absolutely. Someone that cannot be rigidified in a cast or locked inside any kind of trap. So I know this is not sufficient as an answer, but it might be a way. Starting with Kant.
That's actually very useful. Yes, that's
Yeah.
very interesting. The critic can be playful, whereas the dogmatic person is like that. So that's very good. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, both Tom and Catherine. And it's also a reminder for our students that passive reproduction is a part of learning, but it's not the goal of the critical mind. So indeed, I see Christian is here with us. Christian, can you summarize the main contribution of your chapter titled "Negative Plasticity and the Indifference of the Body"?
Yes, thank you. I'll try to keep it short. I think it'll be 3 to 4 minutes. Thank you very much, both to you, Nadesh, and to Willow, and to Leuven University Press for editing the volume and for organizing this event. And thank you again to Catherine Malabou. Not only is her work of great interest in itself, in my personal research experience, I've found that it also provides the dynamic necessary to blaze unorthodox inroads into some of the more puzzling passages of the classics. This has made her work a particularly valuable resource for me in reading Hegel and Freud in the context of my now almost finished dissertation. My chapter in the volume focuses on the destructive or negative component of plasticity. If I had to state in one sentence what hooked my attention in this context, it would be this. I see in negative plasticity the strange and unsettling idea that absolute negativity in the Hegelian sense can take a form which is not only temporarily fixed, but absolutely and ultimately fixed in such a way that it can no longer be altered. What then struck me in this regard was Malabou's use of several suggestive terms referring to this phenomenon, the common point of which is that we are dealing with a form of a not well understood evil. I think ultimately this is indeed the precise diagnosis, but I do not find it easy at all to reconstruct the underlying logic. Especially difficult is the fact that negative plasticity produces a result seemingly devoid of a subject proper. This, of course, complicates the issue of attributing moral agency, something which is necessary if we are to speak of evil. So in an attempt to understand better what is at stake here, my chapter goes into a discussion of indifference, which is not only the effective result of negative plasticity in Malabou, but also an important category in Hegel's logic. I can spare you technical details. Instead, in the given context, I think it's maybe more interesting to point out some possible ties I see to the paradigm of mimesis. I would propose to take mimesis as a sort of category as well, and that it contributes to fundamentally structuring thought as such. At the same time, mimesis is active at a preconceptual level rather than a conceptual one. In this sense, one might say it has to do with grounding thought in an imaginary level involving the body. The mimetic movement of approximating something is of particular interest. It destabilizes distinct boundaries between the subject and the object, and it raises the question whether what is being imitated is an object or not rather a position of a subject. It seems to me that Malabou's concept of plasticity also falls into this sphere of in between subject and object, and both subject as well as object. In this sense, can plasticity be understood as mimesis transferred into thought? In still other terms, although in terms shared by Freud, Hegel, and Malabou, I understand plasticity to refer to the drive, both to the movement of the drive as well as to the product of this movement. Negative plasticity presents us with the case that there can be a product of the drive, which is no longer in any way tied to movement, but which instead consists in an irredeemable state of being stuck, of not being able to move out of this self-produced condition. And I think one should perhaps even claim, which I try to do in my chapter, that this objectified negativity is a direct outcome of the quote-unquote normal functioning of positive plasticity. This is also to say that this terrifying objectification of negativity is the outcome of an altogether well-functioning mimetic procedure. In this sense, I think that mimesis can help us to conceive of the rigid indifference of negative plasticity as a sort of truth that underlies even positive plasticity all along. So I'll stop here, and since we were invited to prepare a question for Professor Malabou, I would like to ask her if she thinks that there might nonetheless be a way for mimesis to protect itself against this dynamic that I've tried to sketch in my outlook. And if yes, what might this consist in? Thank you.
It is super frustrating because these are such interesting and profound questions. I have just a few minutes, so what can I say? This is fantastic. What can I say? So I will just draw one thread out of the very rich thing. Well, the very rich questions you raised. So briefly, I mean, this question for me resonates with the work I've been doing on Beyond the Pleasure Principle by Freud, where clearly he opens a question that he doesn't close about precisely the Beyond the Pleasure Principle, what goes beyond the government of the pleasure principle, where evil is a possibility that is equal to its perfect contrary, that is the loss, that is the end of power, that is the end of pressure. So Freud opens the question of the death drive as able to go both ways, either evil and petrification of the unconscious and of the death drive. That's why he evokes the devil in the very last chapter of the book, or on the contrary, a total fluidification of power that leads to what I call anarchism. So Freud doesn't go that far. He doesn't really use the term anarchism, but he opens, yes, a crossroad between the two possibilities. So one again that leads to absolute violence and petrification, and yes, and it's a door open to any form of embodiment of evil, fascism, etc., where mimesis is very powerful. And on the other hand, mimesis is understood as an anarchistic movement that imitates just the inorganic nature, that is total absence of pressure, total absence of rigidity. So this is what immediately resonates in me while hearing you. I know this is just partial, but this is, yes, what I would say immediately.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much
Super interesting.
to you both, Christian and Catherine. It seems that it's a potential for another article
Yes,
on
yes,
that subject.
it's too, I mean,
But it's very helpful for us to hear the direction in which you're thinking, and I haven't thought about that way in relationship to beyond the pleasure principle. So that's very instructive, and also your gesture of returning to texts that we think we know and that we have read, and reading them from a new angle, from a new perspective, in directions that I think exceed also sometimes the intention of the author, in this case Freud, since also you've been quite critical of psychoanalysis. But this is very stimulating. I see that Gabriel is here. Let me see. The title is Benjamin's Great Criminal, a Plastic Mime. Gabriel.
Yes. So my introduction will be way more tentative if I compare it to what has just been said. I would say that for me in general, it is very much as Professor Malabou writes, that plasticity is a kind of motor scheme for philosophy. And if I study philosophical texts, then I tend to be most interested in the points where the conventional distance they attempt to maintain vis-a-vis the political or politics no longer holds, where it implodes, so to speak. This is why Walter Benjamin for me is, of course, an important figure. And what my chapter does, and now I get a bit more concrete, is, and there's been very much written about Benjamin's critique of violence. He opens a dualism in the essay, and it's a dualism between a kind of acceptable violence and a form of violence that is repressive and that needs to be undermined. Simultaneously, there is a motif that is not usually studied in the essay, and it's the motif of the great criminal. And the great criminal is of interest for the volume as a whole, I would say, because as Benjamin says, the great criminal mimes the law and is of particular interest because in this kind of mimesis of the law, there occurs one of these few moments where the violence of the law expresses itself in a very naked and pronounced fashion. And this is because, well, due to many reasons, but what it does functionally is that it seems to open a path where the law undermines itself almost. And the chapter does this by a reading of the law, and it does it via using plasticity in order to express where the law, in fact, implodes under its own weight, where it only operates elastically. And the chapter is in search of another notion of the law, one that might be plastic, and one that might provide resources to oppose the kind of centralization of violence that, of course, the law represents most often in the form of the state. So this is it. I'll leave it there. It's tentative, as I said. I don't have a question for Professor Malabou because she had to deal with this throughout my doctoral studies already. So I'll leave it there.
where are you now, Gabriel?
I'm in Austria.
And what are you doing? I mean, what are you up to?
It's postdoctoral misery so far, but it will it will change.
Yeah, that's a tough time. Yes, well, yes, I perfectly remember your dissertation. Of course, I mean, this is a great paradox to talk about plasticity of the law, because by definition, the law is not plastic, otherwise it's not a law. So maybe we can think of jurisprudence as a form of plasticity. There's also a book in French that was published. It was called Flexible Right. But it was about jurisprudence. It was not really about the law. I mean, it's very paradoxical, the idea of a plasticity of the law. And for me, that's why, again, I was interested in anarchism, because it's the only political doctrine, let's say, that allows for plasticity of the law, because it is the law is collectively decided as soon as it comes from above as a governmental decision, or even if it comes from the juridical power, it's not plastic. So that's why Aristotle already said that equity could not function within the domain of the juridical, that justice, and Derrida has written a lot, as you know, about that justice doesn't have a place in law. So yeah, my answer here, I think it's super interesting. And Benjamin, I know, was very was a kind of anarchist himself, that appears in his conversations with Scholem. I do think that, yes, for me, anarchism is the response to your question.
Once again, this is very rich for me because I always thought of Benjamin's of two texts that deal with mimesis. One is the great text on the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction that everybody quotes, and the other one is this enigmatic short text on the mimetic faculty that is very compressed. And so, linking it to mime and the law is certainly something that goes beyond anything that I thought about Benjamin before, and very, very productive. So, thanks very much. I see that Matthijs Peters, my colleague at Leiden University, who has written a chapter titled Mimesis, Resonance, and the subject, A Critical Comparison, bringing in Armut Rosa, is here. So Matthijs, the screen is yours.
Okay, great. Sorry. So first of all, let me thank Nidesh and Willow for giving me the opportunity to provide a chapter to this wonderful book. Congratulations to you and to everyone here, and I'm honored to contribute to this discussion, especially, of course, in the presence of Catherine Malabou herself today. So very briefly about my chapter. This chapter came about because of my interest in Hartmut Rosa's resonance theory. Rosa is a German sociologist who is sometimes understood as part of the fourth generation of the tradition of critical theory or kritische theorie. And in his early work, he developed a critical theory of modernity, which for him revolves around processes of acceleration that in different ways, he argues, alienate us from people around us, from nature, from social structures, but even from ourselves. And as an antidote to these modern alienating processes, Rosa develops the concept of resonance. And I find it interesting that this concept already came up several times before. But he presents it in a very specific way, because with this concept, he points to experiences that he argues are meaningful because they connect us to the world around us. So that's why they're the antidote of alienation. He argues that we are affected during experiences of resonance, but we also respond emotionally when we undergo them. We cannot really rationally plan or structure them, and they transform us in his view. And he describes how resonance can come about in different areas and contexts, but perhaps the clearest illustration is aesthetic experience. So we can suddenly and unexpectedly be moved and affected when we come to resonate with, for example, a piece of music. And this is an experience that triggers us into responding emotionally, but also one that transforms us. And this is how Rosa defines resonance. And in my chapter, I explore similarities between Nidesh's mimetic studies and Rosa's resonance theory. And in this way, I try to connect the concepts of mimesis and resonance, but also more broadly, I try to create a dialogue between different intellectual traditions. So I emphasize in my chapter, for example, that both theories foreground processes of relationality that problematize the idea of the autonomous, rational, free, and individual subject. And I also describe how both refer to the discovery of mirror neurons as one of the building blocks of their theories about the self, making it possible for both to transcend rigid dichotomies between mind and matter, between individual and collective, between activity and passivity, and so on. And throughout the chapter, I therefore also refer various times to Malabou's notion of plasticity and of the plastic self, as in several ways similar to both Rosa's notion of the resonating self and to Latou's understanding of the mimetic self. And I do this in the chapter by turning as well to Adorno's understanding of mimesis, as well as to the grammatical mode of the middle voice, as it is conceptualized by Roland Barthes and Derrida. But let me end this brief overview with my question for Catherine Malabou. So my question is quite simple. It concerns the notion of resonance as developed by Hartmut Rosa. So I'm simply curious to what extent you're familiar with Hartmut Rosa's notion of resonance and whether you see this concept as possibly a fruitful contribution to your own ways of thinking about plasticity and the plastic self. And I especially had to think about this because before you mentioned Heidegger's response to technology and science vergessenheit. And I had to think of a text in which Rosa connects his notion of resonance to what he calls semi-uncontrollability. So he tries to also find this kind of in-between position that revolves around the one that is kind of in between freedom and determination, so to say. So there should be models that we in some kind of way resonate with, but these models do not completely control us. He refers to a form of in-betweenness in this sense, and this is also where I refer to the notion of the middle voice as also carving out this position of subjectivity in between kind of activity and passivity. So yeah, that would be my question. Thanks very
Well,
much.
thank you so much, Matteo. Unfortunately, I must say I don't know the work of Rosa. I should. I know I should, but you can't read everything, and it's been on my table for a long time, but I didn't. I don't know it. So what I can say is that I'm very well. I'm perplexed, let's say, with this notion of in between, because for me it's a bit of a it's a kind of a skeleton key that opens all doors. So plasticity, in a way, is not really in between. This is something that Hegel taught me, that in fact passivity, activity, etc., explosion, construct are simultaneous, and the space they open is not in between. That's perhaps the critique I would have of resonance. I mean, even if I know very little about it, is that for me it's too confident in the in between. But unfortunately, this is all I can say. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
And thanks, Matthijs, for building the connection between resonance
Yeah,
studies and mimetic studies. It's the first time, to my knowledge, that it's done.
that's very
So
interesting.
it's
Absolutely.
very productive. All right, I think Giulia Rignano, Giulia is part of the Gender Mimesis team, and she already had a question to Catherine that is included in the final coda of the book. Giulia kindly agreed to read a comment from Sergei Zenkine, who cannot be here today, who wrote a chapter on semiosis and mimesis, and then we'll ask a question herself. So, Julia, go ahead.
Well, hi everyone. So I will first read the text of Serge, and then I will proceed with my question. Dear colleagues, participating in the Homo Mimeticus 3 conference and in the edition of its proceedings was an important and instructive experience for me. The new volume of the Homo Mimeticus project connects the notion of mimetic subject with the concept of plasticity, and Catherine Malabou's contributions boldly expand the scope of mimetic studies, incorporating not only the sociocultural aspects of mimesis, but also more general issues of functioning of the human brain as compared to artificial intelligence. Our thinking, and also that of advanced neural networks, is plastic and self-learning, which necessarily involves imitation of another subject, another self, as Malabou calls it. This other self might be even constructed in the very process of imitation. I find this intersubjective, or more precisely subject-building aspect of mimesis highly important, and my own article in the book is devoted exactly to how it manifests itself in verbal communication, including literary fiction. I have been following the work of the Homo Mimeticus research group for several years now. The first 2 volumes of the book series published under this title are briefly examined in my review of contemporary works on mimesis, published in Russian in the independent Moscow journal New Literary Observer in the issue number 196 of December 2025. I hope this work will continue and perhaps my collaboration too. Let's keep in touch.
Thanks for reading Serge's comment. It is good to know that such things are still possible in Russia, so that's reassuring. Julia, do you want to ask your question to Catherine?
Yeah. So, in the concluding dialogue of the first day of the conference of 2023 that we had a chance to organize as Gender Mimesis together with you, Catherine Malabou, which is now included in the coda of the book. You say that you never write in any form other than address, that you and I quote, hear something like a question, a solicitation, or a voice, and that you situate your writing as answers always. The form of address is itself mimetic. It entails a reciprocal, though not always symmetrical, relation of transformation of both the one who addresses and the one who is addressed. So, with this in mind, I would like to ask you, are there today particular questions or voices from or for the feminist and queer spheres that are calling you and to which you feel drawn to respond in your current or future projects? And do you think that mimesis might itself be among them? Thank you.
Right. That's very beautiful. Thank you so much, Julia. And it's terrible because at the moment I'm working a lot on artificial intelligence and particularly with ChatGPT and what's happening to language today. And I'll talk about that in Leiden when I come. And unfortunately, I'm losing the address, which means that what I wrote a moment ago, a few years ago, that I always address someone when I write, it's becoming less and less true because I use a lot the dialogue with the machine. For example, I could ask the machine the question you asked me, and I'm discovering what it is to be in dialogue with someone or something that doesn't care about addressing me. That is absolutely indifferent to any kind of address, and that challenges my own address because whom am I talking to when I exchange with the machine philosophically? And so it is very interesting because I, I I think this is not only induced by the machine, but I wonder if this machinic exchange is not at the heart of all addresses. This is something that did not come to my mind before. But now I wonder, even when I'm talking with you, to you, I wonder if this anonymity is not also an important dimension of the address. So that is the absence of address as part of the address. And I wonder, I don't know, maybe you can give me the answer if it means something for gender theory. I don't know, maybe there's something in the gender, let's say plasticity, in gender plasticity that is possible because it is not addressed to anyone. The way in which we create our gender, so to speak, the way in which we shape the gender is maybe without an address, even if it's also an address. So I'm really interrogating the artificial within the address.
Catherine, and it is always fascinating to see how your thought keeps moving and keeps changing and keeps returning and taking different perspectives with the very recent. I mean, the book on intelligence is not so old. I mean, in English it appeared quite recently. In French it appeared earlier. We are running a bit out of time, and I know that Willow asked to teach, and maybe I ask Willow if you have any comment, since I know that you have to go teaching, Willow, or any question or anything you want to say to Catherine.
I do have a follow-up question for what you've just said about artificial intelligence, because I think it's really interesting. And there's a couple of things that came to mind when you were talking about artificial intelligence being kind of anonymous. And is it anonymous, or is it like a plurality of voices, a cacophony of voices? Because people who are working in AI talk about how AI is also prejudicial and it is built up by drawing on information from so many different sources. So I'm just wondering what you mean when you talk about it being anonymous.
Yes, of course. I mean, anonymous in the sense that I know it's made of 1,000 data that are drawn from here and there, conversations, books, etc., etc. So it's not anonymous, it's a plurality of voices, as you say. But what I meant is that when we chat with it, it is clear that all these voices are not intentionally addressing me. That's what I meant. You know, we have a production of meaning for sure, but that is not that has no intention, that has no destination. That's what I meant by anonymity. All
So
these
when you
voices are
feel,
not, they're not talking to anyone.
so when, if you don't feel someone that is calling to you, are you just speaking to yourself?
So
Or,
that's the question.
okay.
That's the question I'm exploring at the moment. I don't think so. I don't think so.
Can I just ask
No.
one follow-up question? Which
Yes.
philosophical legacy is inspiring you in this process? Or which, is there one thinker that you're focused on?
At the moment, maybe you'll be surprised, but I'm rereading of grammatology. This is how it started. So all these questions, yes, arose from a rereading of grammatology. But it would be too long to explain.
Okay.
But let's say that I read a lot of people that are who are not philosophers, but you know, tech people. I'm trying to understand what's going on. But it, yes, if I'm interested in Derrida because I'm wondering if the question you just asked, are you talking to yourself? Of course not. And at the same time, I'm not talking to anyone. I think this was at the basis of deconstruction. So isn't artificial intelligence prolonging the task of deconstruction? Is it distorting it? Is it plastically transforming it? You know, I'm in all this. Thank you so much.
Thank you for giving us more on that. It's fascinating. I'm looking forward to seeing what you write about this. Yeah.
Yeah. It's too bad you're not in Leiden when I come.
I would love to be there. Thank you, Catherine. And thank you, everyone. I have to go and teach
Thank you,
now, but
Willow.
thank you
Good
very
luck
much.
with your
Okay.
teaching. Yeah.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks, Willow, for co-editing this book. It's been a wonderful experience working with you. So have a great class.
Thank you, Nadesh. Bye. Bye, everyone.
All right. So Catherine kindly agreed to take a few more minutes, let's say maximum 10 minutes, for additional questions that might emerge either online or from Jonathan's in the classroom. So if you have a question for Catherine, this is the moment to take advantage. And for those of you who are in Leiden, we are lucky that Catherine will be visiting us next week, so we can maybe keep the questions for next week. But any questions or comments or observations for people who are still online? And I see Federica has her hand up. Federica, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. I was not part of the project and I'm learning as part of this particular event. So I thank everyone, and in particular Catherine and Nidesh, and of course Willow, who has just left. I'm a narratologist and I'm looking and writing down, you know, frequencies. We have had mention of absence of address, of course, is part of Catherine's work, but also of absence of models, and these begin to form a cluster for me. And also the word destroy, destruction has been, you know, used quite often in the presentations or in the discussion or in the preliminaries. And here is my point. We tend to go, or we tend to ask for our theories to go in an affirmative direction. Very many philosophers and schools of thought have been criticized for not being, let's say, affirmative enough, and I could name a few, but I won't. Given the kind of prospect that we have put across as part of the project of the book or in discussion today, and considering the discussion about destroying, destruction, and the fluidification of everything, which for me coincides with the state of pure war, I'm wondering whether also when it came to the famous quotation that Nidesh gave us as part also of the explanation of the image for the cover, whether this quickness or speed or acceleration towards giving shape again, hurry, you know, fashion again, is not the only form of resistance that we have, in the face of the mechanisms which are not an absence of destruction. So what I'm claiming here, and the question that I do have, is this one: whether destruction is reality is not an absence of models, but, as Kristen was saying also, it's in reality an expression of modeling, and it's part and parcel of modeling towards a rush, towards giving shape again, because unless we give it quickly, we risk staying in a state of fluidification for far too long. Witness the World War, and so on, and so on, and so on. So maybe there is a comment, maybe there is a question, but I'm thankful and I'm grateful for the space of maybe trying to articulate it.
Federica, Katrine, do you want to comment, or is there anything you want to say in relationship to Federica's points?
Yeah, well, that's beautiful as well. I don't think it really calls a question, but it made me think of Heidegger again, who says that yes, we have to. Well, he says that Gestell, who's for him, which is for him, as you know, the main concept. Well, it is the paradigmatic concept of technology. This is a word that for him designates the whole technological apparatus. Gestell has the same etymology than Gestalt, that is form. And so there's a very interesting passage where he interrogates the synonymy or the opposition between the two words. And yes, to shape for him, to give a form to the to the technique, is the urgent task of our epoch. But at the same time, the question remains open. Is it possible? Do Gestell and Gestalt share a common destiny or not? It's true that it is our responsibility, but I don't think there's one possible answer. It's a locus of discussion, questioning.
And considering also what you were saying with regards to the latest technology or to the latest threat as we perceive it from technology, whether this technology is just mirroring, and there is a book out there called, AI Iron Mirror by Shannon Valor. Basically, whether we are just afraid of something that is, once again, reproducing in the creative transformative sense what we place out there as part of the inevitable dynamics of going from fallow to overproductive. And at some point, that collapses in order to create again, a moment of fluidification that will only result in hurrying to fashion again. So is this the mechanism that we think is absent here at this moment? It doesn't seem to be absent at all. Actually, it's almost following a script.
The problem, I think, is that mechanism is not a productive notion anymore, I think, because what AI is doing, the way it functions, is, I think, it goes much beyond this, precisely because these machines, and that's the problem, are plastic, which means they learn by themselves, they transform themselves, they adapt, they they correct their mistakes. That's why, people are so afraid when they say, oh my God, one day the machines will take our place. Why that? It's because they're not mechanisms, they are able to outgrow the very notion of mechanism. That's what is so frightening.
I hear a change of perspective, Catherine, from the post-phase, I think, of morphing intelligence, and also of the discussion where you called attention to the danger of technophobia, and also the fact that very often those who are warning against AI are the very people who are actually contributing to AI, people like Elon Musk, for instance. And I wonder if your position has changed since figures like Jeffrey Hinton and other scientists who are actually contributed to this development of new neural networks and the simulation that is indeed non-mechanical. If your position has changed with respect to the potential danger that it's not only a question of human misuse, but also the type of agency that is emerging within the AI, not within a mechanistic, but in a way more agentic, creative, plastic, mimetic, whatever you want to call it, dimension.
Yes, thank you very much for that. No, I haven't changed because I'm still very much against technophobia. I mean, a lot of books are now published, you know, the techno-fascism, etc., like a pure and simple condemnation of AI. I think this is not productive. But of course, I mean, things have changed in such massive dimensions since my book on intelligence that I'm trying to understand what's going on. And of course, there's a danger, but you can analyze a danger without being technophobic, you know. So yes, a few things have changed, but my position is still to try to understand uh, how plasticity evolves from animals to art to the brain and now to the machines.
I think there will be many other points of connections between the iterations of mimesis and plasticity with
Yes.
respect to AI.
Oh, yes, a lot, a lot.
There is a lot of work to be done, and so this book is not a conclusion. It's time to wrap it up. I would encourage everybody to join in thanking Catherine Malabou for the
Thank you
richness
so much.
of
Thank you
her
so much.
thoughts.
I'm sorry we didn't have more time, but yeah.
Time is always an issue, but I think we managed to cover a lot of topics that obviously deserve further discussion.
Absolutely.
And so if you happen to be in Leiden next week, Catherine Malabou will be receiving an honorary doctorate, will be giving lectures, engaging with students as well. So watch out for Catherine being on campus next week. And I look forward to continuing the discussion, Catherine.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody, for joining.
Have a nice evening.
You too. Bye-bye. Thanks for calling out. Thanks for joining. And thanks for contributors for bringing in all these rich perspectives on mimesis and plasticity. To be continued. Bye-bye.